Hey, what's up, Spencer? My name is everybody, and welcome back to another reading vlog. So, as I said in my last reading vlog, I have a ridiculous amount of books on my TBR. It is close to 290 books. And that is why I am currently trying to do my best to get that number down by really focusing on the shortest books that I have on my list in order to try and get as many out of the way as I can as possible. So that's what we're going to be doing today, as I'm going to be reading some of the shortest books that I have on my TBR to try and get through as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So the first book that I'm going to be starting off with is The Message by K.A. Applegate, and this is the fourth book in the Animorphs series. And we have a fun graphic on the cover where when you turn it, it goes from girl to dolphin. This is great. I love it. These books are about a group of 5 kids who have gained the power to turn into animals from an alien because an alien species has come to Earth and is trying to take over the Earth. So these 5 kids are now trying to work to make sure that that doesn't happen. Obviously, we don't want aliens to take over the Earth. That would be a bad time. I never read this book series when I was growing up as a kid, mainly because I could never figure out like which one was the first one to start off with. There are 54 books in this series alone, like not counting the companion series. Apparently there's like a Megamorph series. Apparently there is like a prequel series, which crazy that somebody wrote that many books just for one concept. K.A. Applegate, you are really doing it. Great job, girl. Inspiration to us all. I am really enjoying this series so far. It's great. The last book, the third one, was definitely my favorite so far because it focused on Tobias and his struggle with being stuck in his animal form, which was really great. It was mwah, French kiss. But the first 3 that I read were the graphic novel versions, and this is the first like text-based version that I'm going to be reading, so it's going to be interesting to see what it is like when it is all written out as opposed to just seeing the pictures. But before I can get to that, I got a couple of things that I need to do today. I gotta go and pick up my groceries, I gotta return those graphic novels of the Animorphs back to the library, I got some chores that I gotta do, I gotta do some yoga, like we gotta get all sorts of stuff done so that I can read this book and get it off my TBR. But unfortunately, at the same time, this isn't gonna do anything for my TBR, because when I read a series book, like if I want to continue on in the series, obviously the next book is gonna end up being on my TBR, so it kind of cancels each other out. So probably after this, I'm gonna try and do short standalones to try and knock a couple off. But with that, let's just get our day going so that we can get some shit done, you know? Banana bread. I don't know what happened to it when we were first cutting into it, like closer to like the end part. It was holding together, but now we're like more in the middle. It's really fallen apart. I don't know what happened. It just is crumbs now, I guess. I'm gonna try some out. We had some overripe bananas that really needed something to be done with, so I decided to make banana bread, and let's see how it tastes. It's banana bread. I wouldn't say that this is particularly good, but it's not bad either. It's edible. I feel like maybe if I had some chocolate chips, to mix in there with it. That would have made it pretty good, but it's okay. So I finished reading The Message, and I'm gonna be giving this book 3.5 stars. I don't know if this is because now I'm reading the text version as opposed to the graphic novel, but this was definitely my least favorite out of all of the Animorph books so far. This one is about Cassie and Tobias. They have these weird dreams where somebody at the bottom of the ocean is like calling to them and asking to be rescued, and so they decide to go and do that. Except, I don't know, I feel like I was really reminded that these characters are children in this book, and it was kind of annoying to me that they were not taking what's going on as seriously as I really felt like they needed to. Like, they only have 2 hours to be in their morph, and when they first, like, initially try and go into the ocean and, like, discover what's going on, they literally waste, like, half of their time just playing around as dolphins and having fun being dolphins, and I'm like, come on, guys, like, the Earth is in mortal peril, and we're trying to stop, like, all of these bad aliens. Can we not pretend to be dolphins for like 5 minutes, please? Please. It also kind of felt like the characters were pretty underdeveloped for what they need to be. Like, I know that these are like kid books, but I wish that the characters were more developed than what we currently have. Like, for example, they keep on saying that Jake is the leader, even though he hasn't done anything to really like gain leader status. It's not really like he comes up with plans or really like guides people or is like a good emotional support. He's kind of just there, and in my opinion, a character like Rachel or Tobias would fit the leader role a lot better than Jake does. Like, Jake is a pretty flat, plain character, so I'm not really sure why everybody in the group keeps on saying that he's their leader. And there is the beginnings of like this kind of romance between Cassie and Jake going on, and I'm not really about it because there isn't really any reason for them to get together. Like, there's no event that like brings them together. It's not like they spend extra time together or have like deep conversations or anything. Like, they feel like they're on the same playing field as anybody else in the group. So I'm not really sure why we're putting these two characters together. It just is not super working for me so far. So yeah, that's why I gave this book 3.5 stars. I am gonna keep on continuing in the series because I do want to know what's going on with the plot, like, overall, and where things are going to go, and how things are going to ramp up, and all sorts of stuff like that. So, you know, they can't all be winners. I'm hoping that, seeing as the last one that I read with Tobias was really good, that hopefully that means that there's gonna be other ones in the future that will also be bangers, so yeah. And with that, I am moving on to my next book, which is going to be The Privilege of Youth by Dave Pelzer. And this is the same guy who wrote the book A Child Called It. And if you're not familiar with A Child Called It, it is a book that is a true story. It is an autobiography about Dave when he was a kid, how he was very severely abused by his mother. And the book ends with him being taken away and put into foster care, so I assume that that's what this book is about, is him being a teenager and growing up in foster care and all of the things that he is going to learn along the way of growing up, being a teenager, living this type of life, dealing with the aftermath of the abuse that he went through, you know, all sorts of that type of stuff. So yeah, with that, let's get into this one. Alright, checking in, and sorry if you can hear my dryer in the other room, but I have now gotten to 80 pages of The Privilege of Youth, and this one isn't really doing it for me. Going into it, with the first chapter is about Dave when he is an adult and he is doing his work, you know, going around the country, doing workshops and like talking at schools and stuff like that, and he gets a call from his wife telling him that his foster father, Dan, has unfortunately passed away from cancer. And because of that, I thought that this book was going to end up being kind of like an ode to Dan. It was going to be about Dave, you know, moving into Dan's house, how they became like foster child and father, and like all of these stories about how Dan became like an important part of his life, how he was a positive influence, like how they developed their relationship, all of this stuff. But no, that's not really what's happening at all. This instead is kind of just like a basic teenager's life. Like, he definitely isn't living the most privileged, amazing life ever. There's things that he's still struggling with, but a lot of the stories that he's talking about is just basic, average things that teens are going through in the 70s, which is the time in which he was a teen. He talks about having some struggles at school. He talks about working at a job after school. He talks about making friends and moving into a new neighborhood and just really basic stuff where I kind of don't understand why we're reading about this, because it's not like he's reflecting as to how these experiences made him the person who he is today, why he decided to tell us like these particular stories as opposed to like something else. He's kind of just being like, oh yeah, I moved into this neighborhood and like I met these people and I bought a mini bike and me and my friends would ride around on the mini bike and stuff like that, where I'm like, why do I need to care about this? And reading some of the reviews on Storygraph, it seems like quite a few other people like feel the same way, where they were like, oh, A Child Called It was really good, some of his other books were really good, but this one kind of feels like he's milking the book deal and kind of just putting something out there so that he can just make more money as opposed to actually having like something to say. And I totally get that. Like, I am 80 pages in, I'm almost halfway through, and I am really skimming at this point because I'm so bored with what's going on and like how little Dave has to say. Like, I don't really care about any of the things that he's talking about right now. So unfortunately, I am going to end up DNFing this one. Although this does kind of make me want to reread A Child Called It, because that was really good and I haven't read it in at least like 15 years, so maybe I should go back and do that at some point. So instead, the next book that I'm going to read, I came across this one, I totally forgot I had it on my shelves, very short, it's only like 100 pages. This is called Bob Croft, Navy Diver, Submariner, Father of American Freediving. This is not something that I myself would pick up on my own. The reason why I have this is because my grandfather, the last like 2 years before he passed away, there were like 2 books that he was really into, and this was one of them. He would talk about it frequently, about this guy and how he like innovated freediving and stuff like that. And so when he passed away, I decided to keep the books that he had been talking about because obviously they were very important to him. And so now kind of feels like a good time to get into this one and get through it and see what he was talking about, I guess. I am interested to see if they're going to mention at all like things like, I know that Polynesians have been doing like free diving for like hundreds and hundreds of years and that they are very good at it, so I wonder if there is any like reference to more indigenous people doing that stuff, or if this is going to be more of like a whitewashed version of this type of thing. But I'm still interested to get into it because this was something that my grandfather was very interested in and really into, so like, hey, why not, right? And then I had also started an audiobook. I needed an audiobook to listen to, and so I decided to do The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander. This audiobook is only about 5 hours long, and I always listen to things on minimum 2 times speed, so that means that this is only like 2 to 2.5 hours for me, and I'm already about 2/3 of the way through with it. And this book is about our main character who is like a pig minder, a pig rearer, and he really wants to not do that. He wants to go out on adventures instead, and one day his pig ends up getting out, and he learns that this isn't just any pig. It is a special pig that somehow knows like secrets that are very important, and now he needs to like track down the pig and learn these secrets so that they can stop some sort of bad guy. I am already 2/3 of the way through it, and it's okay, really. I'm not really about the main character, because it really feels as though he can't do anything on his own. He really needs to have other characters do things for him. They need to come up with the ideas of what's going on. He needs other people to rescue him, and I really am not about main characters like that. What's the point of you being a main character if everybody else in the story is gonna be doing stuff and you're just kind of along for the ride, you know? So I'm gonna finish it because I'm already so far into it, but it's the first in a series, and I am not planning to continue in the series because there is nothing about the story or the characters or anything that really has me. It's not very compelling. It's just pretty average, pretty basic, and kind of simple and disappointing in many ways. So yeah, with that, I guess I'm going to get into this book about freediving and finish the book of 3. I am back. It has been a few days since my last check-in, and I have now read Bob Croft, Navy diver, submariner, father of American freediving, and honestly, I can see why my grandfather liked this so much. There were a couple of parts in it that were kind of eye-roll worthy, especially in the very beginning, because Bob Croft was talking about like his childhood and where he grew up, and he was describing about how he was a young boy during World War II, and how that was such a fun time for him. And I'm just like, bro, really? I mean, I'm glad that you were having a grand old time while literally hundreds of thousands of people were being ripped away from their homes and being forced into camps, and millions upon millions of people were dying. But it would be nice if you had a little bit of perspective on this as an adult. Like, I can see how, like, maybe as a kid, you weren't fully aware of, like, what was going on, and maybe there were things that you had going on that were like, wee, but like, as an adult, you can't see how maybe that was like, not a good attitude to have. Like, he would talk about how like, near his home, there was like, an air base, and so plenty of times they would be like practicing dogfighting, and sometimes there would be accidents that would make it so that like a plane would crash and the pilot would die, and he was like, and then me and my friends would go down to the beach and we would collect scavenge from all of these airplane crashes. And it's like, dude, like, this is not something that you should really kind of be proud of and be like, wow, this is such a great memory for me. Like, people literally died, my guy. But moving like further on into him like working in the Navy and then eventually like being a really deep free diver and like going down to the depths of like 250 feet and stuff like that, it was interesting to read about all of the different like experiments that they did and the different ways that he like learned how to do all of these things. He had like somehow developed this like new technique into how to like hold your breath for so long and how to like fill your lungs with so much air. And it was really interesting to read about like the different things that they had thought would happen to the human body when you got down to those depths, because obviously the further down you go, the higher the pressure is because of all of the water that's on top of you. So they reasonably thought that the human body would not be able to handle having that much pressure put on it, but then obviously they learned that that wasn't true. So like, that stuff was interesting. I can see how and why my grandfather would have been really compelled by this story and really into it, especially because a lot of it took place in Rhode Island and Connecticut, which is where he was living, and he was very big into local history, so this was nice to read, and it did make me feel kind of connected to my grandfather, although I do wish that he was still alive so that we would be able to talk about, like, the Asian freedivers. Like, I did a little bit of research about that, and apparently for, like, hundreds of years, these groups of people have been free diving, like, to the, like, 250-foot mark that Bob Croft was able to work up to. So I wish that we could have talked about that. It would have been nice to be able to have a discussion with him about this book now that I have read it. So I feel a little bit sad about that, but also it's nice to feel connected to him in some way. Also, here's a picture of him as a sad clown, which is kind of funny, but like what he used to do once he was a retired veteran. He and all of his friends used to dress up as clowns, and they would go to the children's hospital and a variety of other like volunteer events, and they would do magic tricks and make balloon animals and do things to like make kids happy, so that's a nice thing. I don't know why he looked so sad in this picture and why he decided to take this picture like this, but this is the best and really like most solid picture that I have of him, which kind of freaks out people who come and visit me because they reasonably are like, dude, why the fuck do you have a picture of a sad clown hanging in your bedroom? But this is really who I remember my grandfather as, is this sad clown who did bring a lot of joy to people. And since I finished that one, I decided that I was going to move on to this duology of gay hockey romance that my roommate gave to me. They are both very short. They are only 200 pages, and it is a duology, and I'm pretty sure that I already said that part. The thing that I am slightly upset about is that when I went to my Storygraph to add this to my currently reading, I found that I had completely forgotten to add this to my TBR. So my reading this isn't going to bring my TBR down at all, because it wasn't on there in the first place. This technically didn't count towards my TBR because it's such an obscure book that Storygraph doesn't even have it at all. When I was reading Animorphs, it technically didn't count for my TBR because I added the next one to it again. This is such a fail to see. This is like the cycle that I keep on getting stuck in, where I am constantly reading so much, but because of a variety of different circumstances, my TBR happens to like never go down because I find that I had forgotten to add books to my TBR. There's things in a series, so I'm adding more of the series, and or I just stumble across new books and it's very easy for the TBR to go back up, and it's just, I'm constantly stuck at like around 290 books, and no matter how hard I work, it never goes down. But anyway, the first one in this series is called Hooking the Captain. And I am 50 pages into it so far, and my goodness, is this a ride. This is a very fast-paced book that is happening. In the 50 pages that I'm already in, they have hooked up twice already, the two main characters. What this book is about is it is a dual POV between these two guys named Ford and Coop. And in the very first chapter, Ford, so much stuff happens. He's at college, and he has been hooking up with one of his fraternity brothers for the past few months. But because he doesn't feel ready to come out about his relationship, he decides to break things off with the fraternity brother, but then ends up regretting doing that, and spending many months trying to get back with the fraternity brother, only to find that he has moved on and is not really about it. Ford then learns that the fraternity brother that he is desperately in love with is dating one of his professors, and he gets so jealous that he decides to report the professor to the dean of the university for like sexual misconduct with a student. And obviously, his ex gets really upset about that, and they don't get back together. And because Ford is so sad that he's never going to be able to get back with his ex, he decides to go on a vacation to Hartford, Vermont, and this is where he meets Coop, who is the captain of the Boston Bruins. and they start hooking up and being together. And this all happens like within the first 10 pages of the book. It's very interesting, it's very fun, it's very spicy, and I gotta say, I always love books that have a lot of spice in it because they always make me laugh so much. It is such a good time for me. Like, for example, the first time that Ford and Coop hook up, like, Ford sucks Coop off. And then after he's done, like, Ford, like, sits back and he's like, all right, now it's time for me to get my shit wet. But instead, Coop just, like, pulls up his pants and then, like, stares forlornly out the window and is like, we need to talk. That's just so funny to me. That's hilarious. I'm sorry. I just, I can't do it when we're supposed to be taking stuff seriously, and it's, I don't know. I love it. I'm having a good time with this, and there's all sorts of things going on, and I'm really enjoying it. So I think this will probably be the last 2 books that I read for this vlog. I'm gonna read these 2, and then when I come back to you guys, we'll wrap everything up. While editing, I realized that I hadn't mentioned that I gave Bob Croft 4 stars, and I also didn't say anything about the Book of 3, which I did finish. There honestly isn't really much to say that I hadn't said the first time. I gave this book 2 stars. Everything was just way too easy for the main character. Everybody else was doing things for the main character. It just wasn't really for me, and even though it's the first in a series, I'm definitely not going to be continuing on. But now, let's continue on with these ones. Look at me, I'm like color coordinated with my background right now. Looking great. So I have now finished both books in this off the bench hockey romance series, and I gotta say, first one, really enjoying. I gave that one 3.75 stars because I was having a great time with it. Second one, not good at all. 2 stars, very boring. I'm gonna go full spoiler with this because I'm gonna assume that you're not gonna be reading this obscure hockey romance that I found that my roommate gave to me. But if you are, you know, skip ahead. Do whatever you want. You do you. So I think I might have already mentioned previously, like, the first chapter, what happens, which is our main character, Ford, you know, he breaks up with his ex, regrets it, tries to get back together with his ex, only to find that his ex has moved on, and then reports his ex's new boyfriend, because he is a professor at the school, for, like, sexual misconduct, you know, for doing stuff with a student. And this is when Ford, like, goes up to Vermont and meets Emmett Cooper, and they start having, like, a secret relationship. So as the book goes on, Ford does not tell Emmett Cooper about what happened, because it turns out that Cooper is friends with the professor who got reported. And so Ford, like, obviously doesn't want to tell him because he's like, oh no, he's gonna be so mad at me that I reported his friend over something stupid, and, like, I regret it. I shouldn't have done that. That was a really dumb thing for me to do. But obviously, eventually, the truth comes out and they break up, causing Ford to, like, move to London for a new job. And while they are broken up, Emmett Cooper gets with his goalie and starts, like, a whole relationship with his goalie, but they end up having to break up because the goalie gets traded to a different team and they have to move away. Sorry, you guys can probably hear my roommate's cat scratching on her scratching board. So, like, a whole bunch of time goes by, and 10 months later, Ford has moved back to the States, and he's on a date with some random guy, and their date ends up being to a Boston Bruins game. So he texts Coop being like, hey, just to let you know, I'm at your game, I'm platonically rooting for you, I hope that you guys win and have a good time. At the end of the date, when they're walking out, Ford ends up running into this guy who we had previously been told has sexually assaulted Ford when they were in high school, and this is like a big like trauma thing around. So because he is so rattled by running into this guy who did this horrible thing to him, he goes home and he drinks some alcohol and he takes some sleeping pills and he like tells Coop that he did that. And the first book ends with Coop like dramatically running over to Ford's apartment to be like, no, you can't mix alcohol and sleeping pills, that's super dangerous. And like, the thing about it is like it didn't seem as though Ford took a whole bunch of sleeping pills. He took like a normal amount and was drinking a normal amount of vodka. And like, while you shouldn't do that, like you're definitely like not gonna get a good reaction because of that, you can't OD from that. Like I even went and asked my pharmacist roommate, like, hey, what happens when you interact like these two normal amounts of alcohol and sleeping pills? And he's like, oh yeah, you would be fine. So yeah, we have this whole dramatic moment over technically really nothing. And obviously the second book is, we're starting off with, we bring him to the hospital, you know, he gets all checked out, he's fine. And then really nothing happens for the entirety of the book, which is what made it so incredibly boring. Like, slowly, Ford and Coop, like, reconcile their relationship and get back together, but there's really no conflict, because, like, Ford talks about his assault with his parents, and they both respond as though they've been clinical psychologists for the past 20 years, and, like, Coop ends up coming out to his entire team, and nobody on the team, like, has a problem with it, or like outs him to the press or anything. They're all extremely supportive. Every single person that these two guys like end up coming out to is wildly supportive, and nobody ever has anything bad to say, and nobody ever is like homophobic, which is just not realistic in any way. You know, like, Boston and Massachusetts is a fairly liberal place, but there are still people who are homophobic who live there. And then the book just ends with them getting married after they've only been back together for like a few months, like not even a year. It's kind of crazy, and it was really boring. Some parts of this book really made me feel as though you could definitely tell that it was written by women, because the way that some of the men were reacting to different situations in this book was just not the way that men react to things, but is very similar to the way that women react with things. Like, at one point, Coop mentions that he's like gonna go on a date, and so everybody in his hockey team is like, oh my god, you have to like text us every hour on the hour to make sure that you're not dead, and like that you don't end up becoming like true crimed and all of this stuff. And that's just not the way that men react to learning that their friends are gonna go on dates. They would say, cool man, I hope you have a nice time. And that's it. But I know that this is something that a lot of women do, where they're always texting their friends and updating and making sure that they're like still alive and nothing bad has happened to them and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, this is really something that tells me that we're just not, we don't understand how things work in Guyland and how men react to things. I did have a good time reading it. I'm glad that I did read this series, but I am disappointed that the second one was not anywhere near as fun as the first one was. Alright, so that's the end of my reading vlog. Thank you so much if you got all the way to the end. I really appreciate you hanging out with me. I think I might focus a little bit more on reading vlogs right now, because with everything that's going on, this is the thing that is most manageable and most fun for me. So yeah. If you like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more like it. But besides that, I hope that you stay safe and have a fantastic day. Bye!